Israel has a secret weapon in its genocide on Gaza, the media. Ever since Israel's war on Gaza began, Western outlets, from the BBC to CNN, from The Guardian to the New York Times, have made themselves complicit in the murder of tens of thousands of Palestinians. And they've done this in three important ways, beginning as soon as Israel's war began. First, they've concealed important context from their audiences. After October 7th, the media repeatedly asked this question.
Do you condemn what Hamas did?
Do you support what Hamas launched?
Will you now take the opportunity to condemn what Hamas did on October the 7th?
Though you cannot condone the killing of civilians in Israel, can you?
Now that question served to frame anyone who was trying to contextualize the attack or to raise concerns about Israel's response as illegitimate. This was an attempt to silence any speaker sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, including most of the Palestinians who were invited on air, by casting them as suspicious. And the question effectively erased discussion of Israel's occupation and oppression of the Palestinians from public view right from the start. And when Palestinians did try to talk about history, they were misrepresented. Here's one very striking example. On the 10th of October last year, Sky's Kay Burley more than once accused Palestinian ambassador to the UK, Hussam Zomlot, of saying on 7th of October that Israel had it coming.
The Palestinian ambassador basically said the last couple of days that Israel had it coming. This is an atrocious comment by the Palestinian ambassador to the UK.
What he actually said was, Israel knew this was coming their way. Sky later apologized.
We recognise that this was not what Dr. Zomlot had said.
But do you see the trick? Second, instead of providing context to Israel's war, the media has often preferred fiction. Time and again, journalists failed to challenge Israel's assertions. For example, they repeatedly allowed Israeli officials to broadcast the myth of Israel's precise military operations in Gaza without scrutiny. Meanwhile, claims of widespread systematic sexual assault on October 7th continue to be stated as fact. That's despite many of the sources of those claims proving later to be unreliable.
Since the 7th of October, Israel started preparing and putting together a huge campaign to delegitimize the Palestinian people, then do the ethnic cleansing, and then the international media, mainstream media, were literally following the cues.
Third, Palestinians have been constantly dehumanized. Their political aims and aspirations have been erased. Palestinians have been constantly cast as either terrorists,
the worst terror attack in Israeli history today, laying bare the brutality in graphic detail,
or victims of a humanitarian disaster.
The humanitarian crisis in northern Gaza intensifies.
And that's a binary that erases the notion of Palestinian resistance from the public conversation. That binary also benefits Israel. If Palestinians are all terrorists, then they can be killed without accountability. And if they're all victims of a humanitarian disaster, then there's no blame to be apportioned for this naturally occurring crisis. Either way, media outlets can avoid saying who killed those Palestinians when they simply die in their thousands.
In Gaza, Hamas officials say at least 700 people have been killed.
More than 1,400 people have been killed.
50 children have been killed in 48 hours in Jabalia in northern Gaza.
The war in Gaza continues with significant civilian casualties. Instead
of calling for the bombs to stop, the media can focus on simply calling for humanitarian aid to get in. And instead of exposing the causes of this genocide, the media can adopt the much more comfortable frame of an inexplicable disaster. So why have Western audiences lapped up this false framing? That's easy. It's because they've long been conditioned to view events in the Middle East through Islamophobic, racist narratives. For at least the last 23 years, the war on terror has been the lazy and simplifying lens through which countries like the US and its allies have justified all manner of violence.
And rid the world of thousands of terrorists and freed a country from brutal oppression. We are winning the war on terror.
This fake war on terror stamp on the Arab world has created false contrasts between terrorists and victims and between barbaric chaos and the liberal order. And it's erased all distinctions between different groups of rebellious Muslims. It's merged resistance with insurgents and conflated independence movements with Islamist imperialist projects, positioning all of them as a threat to Western democracy. Here's a fact. On October 7th last year, every journalist in every Western newsroom knew what Israel was about to do to Gaza. What's been lacking isn't knowledge, but the moral courage to report the truth. It takes courage to report honestly on a genocide. And it takes courage to reveal the complicity of Western governments required to make it possible. And it takes even more courage to cut a clear path through a colonial history of abuse and occupation that Western audiences have long been trained to ignore and reject.